Welcome to the lore-accurate American Deep South. We got weird fish, weird lizards, weird people, hurricanes, and most importantly, family. South of Midnight's a game that I was interested in after the reveal, but I haven't really been too big on playing story or character-driven games in the last few years. To be frank, the last game I played for the story was Baldur's Gate 3, which I still need to finish, and before that would have been Death's Gambit Afterlife back in 2021. I'm what you might call a chronic cutscene skipper. I just want to make sure every single cutscene skip button works. It's simple QA work. I've always been a gameplay first kind of person. I never really needed a story to keep me playing a game, and honestly that probably will never change. But somehow, some way, I still ended up here and I'm glad I did. South of Midnight opens up with a neat intro cinematic that gives strong Wes Anderson stop motion vibes, and then following that is a warning that the game features some deep and dark themes about trauma and abuse, so we're kinda already in the red. If that's not your kind of flavor, you've been warned. From there, we're in the main menu, so I take a look at the options, and normally an options menu is just that, an options menu, but South of Midnight has a plethora of options that many games don't. Namely, a custom difficulty option to tweak specific aspects of combat so you can be more story focused over gameplay. That's something that has been on the rise recently, and I can appreciate that for those it applies to. The ability to tinker and mess with different settings for the gameplay so you can make the experience more suited to what you're looking for. But what really interested me was the option to simply add a skip button to all combat and chase sequences within the game, of which there are plenty of. The game starts with an animated storybook cutscene giving us a brief explanation of the job of a weaver. It's short, but it gives us what we need. A weaver is an individual who can mend the sorrow and pain of an individual's past. These negative emotions manifest through the grand tapestry as spirits called haints. Think of the grand tapestry as sort of a life force, and this sorrow and pain creates tears in the grand tapestry. A weaver is chosen during the arrival of a mighty storm, and the previous weaver went missing some time ago. Then we're introduced to the currently mighty storm enduring Prospero, the last known location of the previous weaver and current home to Hazel, our protagonist. Hazel lives in this elevated trailer with her mother, Lacey Flood. Her father passed away when she was 4. Not too far into the introduction, you find that her father passed away in 2004, which means that Hazel was born in 2000. Only reason I bring this up is because I was also born in 2000, and so it's just pretty nice to have a protagonist that I could sort of relate to. We would have had similar experiences to how the world was at this point in our lives. Throughout the game, I was kind of comparing, like, how would I have reacted at this point in my life versus how Hazel was reacting, and it just made things a lot more interesting and fun for me. A neat observation in this intro here, on the fridge are little magnets of some of the creatures that Hazel meets along the way. With folklore being the foundation of the story, it adds some believability to these creatures, that they're not just made up on the spot, but have a legacy through the tales told throughout generations. With the storm building up, Hazel is home alone packing her things. We're given control to walk around her tiny home while she reminisces a little bit. Her bond with her mother is extremely strong, even if they have their tiny moments like we'll see minutes later. Her mother, Lacey, is a social worker. It's work that she enjoys greatly, but it takes away time from Hazel, which is the basis of the reason they get into a little scuffle before Hazel is sent to check on the neighbors and assist and prep if they need it.
Coffee mug. This world existed before I brought you into it, Hazel Flood. Remember that next time you go around thinking you know everything. Hazel! Everything I do for you.
Whatever. There's no getting through to her. Whatever. Let me go check on Bo.
The interactions are short, but it's clear Hazel's also close with her neighbors as well. She'll make a few comments if you approach certain spots or objects in the neighborhood, and throughout the game you can closely inspect objects and notes to learn more about the world, plus get a short little comment from Hazel.
I miss Sadie. Well, at least the Goodmans won't have to worry about repairs anymore.
Oh, Hazel! Oh, come on in and grab some punch. Ugh, it is fucked up out here.
Well, I came here to check on you, but it looks like you're riding this storm out in style.
But Eventually, Hazel's house is taken by the growing current with her mother still inside. I don't even know why they didn't leave that house hours ago, because the water looked like this when Hazel first steps out, and that already has me like shitting bricks. But you know what they say, overconfidence is a slow in a city. Hazel chases the home down the river, eventually coming to a point where she can leap onto the house, but most roofs aren't flat, and with the rain, she slips and falls into the rapids below.
Holy shit. What just happened? How did I get back to the shore?
And then respawns. It's cool to have the respawn be contextualized just a little bit. Death wasn't necessarily the end of the continuity, but also Hazel didn't freak out enough for me. You just fell into a rushing river with enough force to knock your house over that has your mother inside, and now you magically have been teleported back to shore safe and sound. No. You should be screaming. Eventually, she runs out of the ground and makes the switch to go to her grandmother Bunny's mansion for help. Thanks to her history of track and field, she climbs the broken bridge and gets across the river safely. At the mansion, we finally see Bunny, the aspect of Botox.
Because with those baby on board signs and just want to ram them.
From Hazel and Lacey's interactions, we understand that Lacey has generally negative feelings towards Bunny.
What if we called up Bunny and go over there? You know, the mansion with the hurricane-proof windows?
Now? You want to bring this up right now?
I'm just saying.
But Bunny and Hazel are on much better terms. The feelings between Lacey and Bunny go both ways, as Bunny is quick to dismiss the fact that Lacey is in a runaway house getting carried downstream from a likely historic storm, which minimizes her odds of survival unless immediate action is taken, but instead decides to send Hazel to bed. But before that, Hazel mentions the strands that she's been seeing during her trek to the mansion, and that piques Bunny's interest. Kinda odd that Hazel was suddenly so fatigued that as soon as she sat down, she immediately fell asleep, but you know, whatever. I'd probably do the same thing. It's been a stressful day. Hazel has a cryptic dream that replays some of the events of the night and then shows her mother being snatched away by these giant long claws, to which wakes her up in a locked bedroom. Clearly, Bunny's trying to keep Hazel around for some reason, likely due to these strands that she mentioned earlier. But Hazel's not going to stick around to find out what. When the balcony door blows open after a strange red mass blocks the door, Hazel uses her history of track and field to climb the mansion. She climbs a lot, but she ends up following this chorus of voices that leads her to a chest which contains 2 magical hooks, which she uses to finish her escape. Blocking the way out of the mansion is more of this big red growth with this strange object in the middle of it. This is called a stigma, and using the hooks, Hazel can unravel it to clear the area out. And from there, she makes her escape and the search for her mother begins. It's here in the second chapter that we get our first taste of combat. And I'll say it up front, combat isn't South of Midnight's strong suit. I started off playing on the hardest difficulty, which wasn't necessarily the most enjoyable experience. The first enemy type was hitting me a lot harder than I could hit it, and while it could kill me in about 3 hits or so, I had to do about 3 full attack strings to kill one. And this isn't Ninja Gaiden. The other enemies aren't just going to stand there and circle you and attack you one by one. The other enemies will actively attack you while you're focused on another. And even when you're just wailing on one enemy alone, they'll still retaliate. I do think some attacks could be telegraphed better, especially when they're flinching from being attacked. In addition to that, they also have this state where they turn yellow and they can't take damage. It's sort of like a combo breaker of sorts. The actual designs of the enemies, though, called haints, are actually pretty cool. These withered monstrosities, there's some that are humanoid, some that have human features, others that are just foreign masses. Visually, very cool. There's a skill tree, and Hazel will unlock the majority of her kit by the end of the first hour or so. Skill points come in the form of floofs, these bundles of the weave scattered throughout maps.
Floofy and soft. Everything else around here feels so wrong.
They're not hard to find. If you use the game's navigation and just go in any other direction than what the game is telling you, you'll probably end up at one. The tree will slowly progress as you get through the story, adding or augmenting parts of Hazel's combat prowess, but I'll admit, I did end up lowering the difficulty primarily because the combat just didn't feel satisfying enough to warrant making the enemies that powerful. While very much not the same kind of game in terms of complexity, Devil May Cry's higher difficulties makes enemies tankier, which enables skilled players to string longer and cooler combos, so it adds more flavor on the player side as well as difficulty. Here you don't get something similar to that, so I was content with lowering the difficulty. It didn't really subtract that much from the combat for me overall. Also, the last game I played before this was the first Berserker Kazan. For 2 playthroughs in a row, I needed a break from strenuous combat. As Hazel makes her way into the country, trying her best to follow the path that the river would have carried her mother away, she gets more tools of the Weaver trade, following the ghosts of the previous Weaver helping a family, where clearly slaves, escape captivity. Hazel picks up on various abilities from the past Weaver's ghosts, which serve both platforming and combat use, namely in the forms of materializing objects for platforming, a forceful push to move objects and enemies, and a pull to pull objects and enemies. The game highlights objects that require the use of these powers, so it's never a puzzle figuring out what to do. If it can be pushed, the trigger will show up. If it needs to be pulled, the other trigger will show. Platforming is obviously a big part of South of Midnight. If you're not fighting, then you're platforming. Nothing particularly complex comes up with platforming until much later on, where you'll need to set a few things up before being able to complete the string of movements for the platforming section. A little bit of timing, some longer strings of movement, but nothing anyone should get stuck on. And thanks to Hazel's history of track and field, she'll be able to climb up most of these platforming obstacles anyways. Further on, Hazel finds a giant catfish stuck in the hand of a giant tree man. This catfish is the narrator we hear in these storybook cutscenes.
Get off me.
Hey, Hazel.
Who's there?
You up here.
Where?
My salvation.
A talking fish. Nope. Ain't no way.
In exchange for helping to free him, he'll help Hazel search for her mother. In order to do so, she needs to collect a magic bottle and literally bottle up the bad vibes that are affecting the giant tree man, which is actually the unveiling of a tragic story of his creation. To get the bottle, she heads to a bottle tree and meets Rhubarb, a man who has clearly lost touch with reality to a degree for reasons we'll understand soon. Rhubarb fears that Hazel is a boo hag.
Hey, get out of here, you damn boo hag!
Boo what?
Yeah, I saw you jumping through the air back there. Ain't no one but a boo hag can do that. I ain't gonna steal my soul while I sleep.
But she disproves this by stepping onto his porch, as boo hags cannot enter uninvited like a vampire, and he allows her to take a bottle. Across the area are 4 stigmas of straight up bad vibes that need unraveling, each one being just a regular combat scenario in order to access, with some exploration in between. After each unravel, we get some backstory on what led to the creation of the Tree Man. Rhubarb mentioned a brother who had gone missing. This brother was Benji, who had some sort of developmental disorder. The brothers moved frequently due to Benji being a large target for bullying. The bullying of his brother didn't necessarily hurt Rhubarb nearly as much as constantly having to move did. Rhubarb, however, did care for his brother and defended him from the bullying when he could. But things only got worse, to the point where people set out a fucking bear trap for Benji to step on. People were insane. They were insane. They're crazy. They're all insane. But the final stigma shows that even Rhubarb eventually had a breaking point. He wanted to show off his talents, become someone greater, but Benji was always his limiting factor, having to protect and take care of him, deal with the bullying, eventually move and start over. He had enough, so what did he do? Well, first, Hazel has to run away from a very aggressive looking cloud in the first chase sequence of the game. It's just a culmination of all the platforming you've done thus far in one very long sequence, when the wall of death behind you is pretty slow, so you'll have no problem getting to the exit. At the end is this great bottle tree that takes up the bottled up sorrow and creates a pattern used to unravel the stigma of the Tree Man. I'm sure you've noticed by now, but South of Midnight is a very pretty game, vibrant and surprisingly lively. My game was on medium because, as always, my PC is trash, but Hazel finds herself in a lot of abandoned and otherwise untouched pieces of land where nature is thriving. Animals are everywhere, and you'll quickly unlock the ability to traverse smaller areas where the animals live and see some interesting things. Funny enough, the animals themselves don't necessarily have much of a role in the gameplay or story, but are an intentional touch to the scenery. There's also this stop motion effect that you can turn on and off in the settings, which I think everyone should leave on. It's a nice little visual flair. Makes some animations have a lot more personality to them. Back at the tree, we learn the fate of Benji. Rhubarb tricked his brother into getting inside of a hollow tree and then boarded the hole up, locking Benji within the tree. The sorrow and pain from the betrayal, plus the magical properties of the tree, merged Benji with the tree, turning him into the giant tree man we now need to deal with. It's dark. It's not bloody or violent, but it's incredibly dark. Benji obviously did nothing wrong, and Rhubart's frustrations are valid. It's discouraging to have to restart over and over and not know how to deal with the barriers to make the next steps towards your dreams. He certainly tried and tried again to be a bulwark for his brother, but it took its toll and he snapped. And we can see how that affected both brothers in the end. Rhubarb is haunted, tormented by his actions, and Benji is a California redwood on steroids. Hazel now needs to get up to the wound near Benji's head, the wound being a physical manifestation of their trauma, and then unravel it. So she begins making her way up the massive tree. But thanks to her history and track, I realize it's kind of crazy that I've gone this far without mentioning the soundtrack even once, but there's a good reason for it. The most notable of songs throughout the game are not only appropriate for the setting, but also lyrically tie into what's going on in the game directly. Literally, these songs are about the people and creatures you are interacting with. As we begin climbing up the tree to deal with Benji, we get the full song sung from Rhubarb's perspective about sealing Benji's fate. And it's a grim situation, but the song itself is more upbeat yet a sorrowful tale. The song bangs though.
Sorry to be moving you around like this.
He was my brother, Benji his name. He saw things different, he was my shame. And I said goodbye, I said farewell. I took my hammer, my ticket to hell.
Hazel fulfills her side of the bargain, releasing Benji from his sorrow and freeing the catfish, so the catfish follows suit and helps her in the search from that point on. The search for Hazel's mother is back on, and you've been introduced to the main loop for the majority of the story. Enter an area, collect bad vibes, learn why the vibes are so bad, and then resolve the old pains and help those affected move on. I won't divulge into any more story specifics from this point on. Each chapter took me 30 to 45 minutes or so, with the occasional stop to look around, find nice views, notes, or floofs for upgrades. There's health upgrades to collect and a ton of notes, so there's plenty to look for. Even though the combat wasn't as spectacular as I normally demand of the games I play, I still ended up invested in the journey in South of Midnight. The combat is there to utilize the other buttons on the controller, and the platforming is to connect the set pieces throughout the game. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think a big part of me avoiding games like this was that I viewed complexity as a necessity in games instead of an option. My main genre of games are ARPGs. I want to tinker with the games I play, find builds, develop my playstyle or my skills. I never really cared about a story. I like gameplay that keeps me entertained, and rarely do I ever let a story or world fill that role instead. But I allowed South of Midnight to do that instead. See, South of Midnight feels like it was designed to keep the story accessible. That's why everything is under your control. Pick the highest difficulty if you want, but if you don't want to be held up in combat, you can make the fights easier or even skip them if you want. You control the buttons you press. I've harped enough on the combat. Visually, the game is amazing and unique. The list of characters is small, but every single one is visually distinct, and this dude right here is probably one of my favorite character designs ever. He's not crazy, but he's extremely cool to me. The story was one of my favorites in the small list I've paid attention to. South of Midnight is far from Game of the Year. I think anyone who says that it is crazy, but I do think that it'll maintain an easy spot on my top 10, if not top 5 this year, purely for the effect it's had on my view of story over gameplay. So thanks Hazel, and more importantly, thanks Meek Mill, the king of dreams and nightmares.
You never heard of Meek Mill, the king of dreams and nightmares?
You can't defeat the king of dreams and nightmares.
Whoop!